At first, they laughed because this noble's land had nothing. No money, no knights, no future. Lord Cassius Vane was the joke of the Northern Territories, a man whose entire inheritance consisted of 47 starving farmers, a crumbling manor, and debt collectors who visited more often than rain. Then he found it, beneath the old well behind the village chapel, hidden for centuries under collapsed stone and forgotten wards, a dungeon. Not just any dungeon, a living, breathing labyrinth that pulsed with monster cores and awakening energy. That night, Cassius locked the village gates, gathered his pathetic farmers in the town square, and smiled for the first time since his reincarnation. From today, he announced, you're not farmers anymore. You're recruits, and class starts at dawn in hell. The neighboring nobles would keep laughing for exactly 3 more months. Then they would start screaming, but we're getting ahead of ourselves. Let's rewind to the morning everything changed. Cassius Vane woke to the sound of rats fighting over something dead in his walls. Charming. He stared at the water-stained ceiling of Ashwick Manor, watching a spider spin its web in the corner, while memories that didn't belong to this body cascaded through his mind like a waterfall of broken glass. Colonel James Shen, 32 years of military service, 4 wars, 17 successful operations behind enemy lines. Dead at 54 from a heart attack in a Pentagon briefing room, mid-sentence, explaining troop deployment logistics to generals who weren't listening. And now this. He sat up slowly, joints popping, and examined his new hands. Pale, soft, the hands of a man who had never held anything heavier than a wine goblet. The original Cassius Vane had been the 4th son of a minor noble house, shipped off to the kingdom's most worthless territory, as a polite way of saying, please go die somewhere we don't have to watch. The manor groaned around him. Half the roof leaked. The servants had fled months ago when the money ran out. His entire staff consisted of one elderly cook who stayed purely out of spite and a stable boy who was definitely stealing what little remained in the larder. Cassius walked to the window and looked out at his domain. Ashwick, 47 farmers scratching survival from rocky soil that barely grew weeds. A single muddy road leading to nowhere important. Mountains to the north that blocked trade routes. Badlands to the east that bred nothing but misery. His territory's contribution score to the crown was so low that tax collectors had stopped bothering to visit. It cost more to send them than they'd ever collect. In the distance, he could see the green fields of Baron Harwick's territory. Fertile, profitable, everything Ashwick wasn't. Pathetic, he muttered, but even as he said it, something stirred in his chest. Not despair, something older, harder. He'd built armies from nothing before, turned underfunded units into precision instruments of war. The Pentagon had called him a miracle worker. His enemies had called him a demon. This body was weak. This territory was worthless. This situation was impossible. Cassius smiled. He'd always loved impossible. The village market, if you could call 3 rickety stalls and a communal well a market, was already buzzing with tension when Cassius arrived. He dressed simply, practical wool instead of noble finery, and most of the villagers didn't even recognize him first. Then he saw it. A thick-necked man with a cruel smile had a farmer pinned against a wall. The farmer was old, maybe 60, with the stooped shoulders of someone who had spent his entire life bowing. His name was Willem. Cassius recalled from the territory records. Grew turnips. Badly. Protection fees are due, old man. The bully's voice carried across the square. Unless you want another visit from my friends tonight. Please, Marcus. I have nothing left. Then find something. Marcus Thorne shoved the old man harder. Or maybe I'll take it out of your granddaughter instead. She's what, 15 now? Old enough to learn how the world works. The other villagers watched with dead eyes. They'd seen this before. Many times. Nobody moved. Nobody helped. Because what was the point? Their lord couldn't even feed himself. Cassius felt something cold settle into his bones. Not anger. Anger was wasteful. This was calculation. Assessment. Marcus Thorne stood 6'2", maybe 220 pounds, most of it muscle. His stance was wide, weight on his back foot, chin up with arrogance. He had a knife on his belt, but hadn't drawn it. Hadn't needed to in years. He was a predator who had never met a real threat. Let him go. The words cut through the square like a blade. Everyone turned. Marcus squinted at the thin young man approaching, then laughed. Well, the noble who can't even feed himself. What are you going to do, Lord Vane? Bleed on me. Cassius kept walking. Steady. Measured. His eyes never left Marcus's center of mass. I said let him go. Or what? Marcus released Willem and turned fully, spreading his arms wide. You'll write a strongly worded letter to the crown? Beg Baron Harwick for help? Everyone knows you're finished, boy. This territory is mine in everything. But name, and soon. Cassius moved, his leg hooked behind Marcus's lead ankle at the exact moment his palm struck the bully solar plexus. Basic physics. Momentum plus leverage plus precise targeting of the celiac plexus nerve cluster. Marcus went down like a slaughtered pig. Before the bigger man could process what happened, Cassius had his thumb pressed into the gap behind Marcus's jaw, directly on the mandibular nerve. The pain would be extraordinary, paralyzing, the kind of pain that made strong men weep. You have 3 seconds to leave my village, Cassius said quietly. If I see you again, I'll show you what I learned in places you can't imagine. 1. Marcus's eyes were bulging. Tears streamed down his face. 2. I'll go. Cassius released him. Marcus scrambled backward through the mud, dignity shattered, and fled down the road without looking back. Silence. Cassius turned and found every villager staring at him. Old Willem, a woman clutching her children, a blacksmith frozen mid-step, and one man, massive, bear-like, watching Cassius with eyes that held neither gratitude nor fear, only intense, calculating wariness. Garrett Stone, the village's unofficial leader, the man others looked to when everything went wrong. Their eyes met. Neither spoke. But something shifted in that moment. A recognition between predators. Garrett didn't trust him. Cassius could see that clearly. But he was paying attention now. That was enough. For now. That night, Cassius couldn't sleep. Something was wrong. No, something was pulling at him. A sensation he'd never experienced in either life. Like a hook behind his sternum, tugging him toward the manor cellar. His soul resonance. The strange ability he'd awakened with in this new body, the one thing the original Cassius had never possessed. He could feel energy flows, sense things others couldn't. And right now, that sense was screaming. He descended the cellar stairs with a candle, following the pull through wine racks empty of wine, past storage rooms empty of stores, until he reached a wall that shouldn't exist. Solid stone, except his resonance said otherwise. Cassius pressed his palm against the cold surface and pushed. The wall moved. Ancient mechanisms groaned to life. Stone grated against stone. Dust that hadn't been disturbed in centuries billowed into the air, and before him opened a doorway carved with symbols that predated the kingdom itself. Beyond it lay darkness, but not empty darkness. Cassius descended. The passage opened into a chamber so vast his candle couldn't find the ceiling. Crystal formations jutted from the walls, pulsing with soft blue light. And at the chamber's center stood an archway of black stone, thrumming with power that made his teeth ache. A dungeon entrance. His soul resonance expanded outward, mapping what lay beyond, and what he felt made his breath catch. 50 floors. 50 floors of monsters, resources, equipment caches, and power beyond anything the surface world could imagine. A primal dungeon, ancient and unregistered, sleeping beneath his worthless territory for centuries. Waiting. For him. Cassius's lips curled into the first genuine smile since his reincarnation. This changes everything. 3 days in the dark. 3 days of mapping corridors that shouldn't exist, cataloging spawn patterns with the obsessive precision of a man who'd spent his previous life turning chaos into spreadsheets. Cassius moved through the dungeon's upper floors like a ghost, his soul resonance pulsing outward in waves that painted pictures no torch could reveal. The monsters didn't see him. They didn't need to. He wasn't here to fight, not yet. He was here to learn. Floor 1 held shadow rats the size of hunting hounds, their fur rippling with darkness that made them hard to track. They spawned in clusters of 3 near the crystalline resource nodes, respawning exactly 47 minutes. After death, Floor 2 introduced bone crawlers, skeletal centipedes that burst from the walls without warning. Floor 3 gave him his first glimpse of actual treasure, healing herbs that glowed faintly purple, growing in patches near the Guardian Chamber. Floor 4 nearly killed him, twice. But by the time Cassius emerged on the 3rd evening, covered in grime and smelling like something that had crawled out of a grave, he had what he needed. Complete tactical assessment, spawn timers, resource locations, equipment drop rates from the few creatures he'd been forced to dispatch, and a plan so audacious it bordered on insanity. Finding Garrett Stone wasn't difficult. The man spent his evenings in the same place every night, the village's excuse for a tavern, nursing watered-down ale and staring at nothing. The weight of leadership without any power to actually lead. Cassius had seen that look before in officers who'd been given impossible orders and told to make miracles happen. He sat down across from Garrett without invitation. "I need 47 soldiers." Garrett didn't look up. "You're drunk, my lord. I'm offering you a future." Now, those weathered eyes rose, and the contempt in them could have curdled milk. "A future? From you, the lord who can barely afford to feed himself, let alone arm a militia." "Not a militia." Cassius leaned forward. "Raiders. Hunters. I'm going to train every able-bodied adult in this village to fight, and when I'm done, they'll be capable of crushing Count Draven's professional soldiers like insects." The laugh that erupted from Garrett's throat was ugly, raw, the sound of a man who'd heard too many noble promises and buried too many friends who'd believed them. "You're not drunk. You're mad. Possibly. We're farmers." Garrett's fist hit the table hard enough to rattle cups 3 seats down. Half-starved farmers with no weapons, no training, and no chance against armored knights. "What exactly do you plan to arm us with? Pitchforks? Strong language? Something better?" "There is nothing. There's a dungeon beneath this village." Silence. The kind of silence that has weight, that presses down on a conversation like a physical thing. Garrett's face cycled through disbelief, confusion, and finally settled on cold fury. Another noble playing games. He stood so fast his chair crashed backward. "Playing games with peasant lives because you're bored, because we're nothing to you, because our deaths don't matter. As long as you're entertained, sit down." "I will not. Your daughter." Cassius's voice dropped to something quiet and sharp. "Mira, the coughing's getting worse, isn't it? The same sickness that took your wife. And the medicine costs more than this entire village earns in a year." Garrett's hands clenched in a fist that could have crushed stone. For a moment, Cassius genuinely thought the man might kill him, might wrap those massive fingers around his throat and squeeze until something snapped. Instead, Garrett turned and walked out without another word. Cassius watched him go. Progress. The footsteps behind him were deliberately quiet enough that most people wouldn't have noticed. But Cassius had spent 3 days in a dungeon where silence meant survival, and his senses had sharpened accordingly. "You can come out, Elena." She emerged from the shadows near the tavern's back in trance, her green eyes gleaming with calculated interest. "You found something under the manor. Something valuable. Were you following me?" "For 2 days." She didn't apologize, didn't explain, simply stated fact. "You descend before dawn, emerge after sunset, and each time you return you're more confident, more certain." Her lips curved. "That's not the behavior of a man exploring empty cellars. Smart. Dangerously smart. What do you want?" "A steak." Elena moved closer, dropping into the seat Garrett had vacated. "Whatever you're building, whatever game you're playing, I want in. My skills for a share of the outcome." "You don't even know what the outcome is." "I know it's better than rotting in this village until Draven decides he wants our land badly enough to take it." Cassius studied her for a long moment. The failed merchant's daughter who'd somehow ended up in the kingdom's most worthless territory. The only literate person in Ashwick. A woman with every reason to claw her way toward power and no loyalty to anything but her own survival. Exactly what he needed. Follow me. The descent to the dungeon felt different with witnesses. Elena's sharp intake of breath when the crystal formations came into view. Garrett, whom they'd found brooding at the village edge and convinced with nothing more than a look, stopping dead. As the Blackstone archway came into focus. Gods above, Elena whispered. Gods have nothing to do with it. Cassius moved toward the entrance. This is a primal dungeon. 50 floors. Monsters, resources, and equipment beyond anything the surface world possesses. Garrett found his voice first. You want us to fight those things? I want you to conquer them. Cassius pulled a small crystal from his pocket. A monster core harvested from Shadow Rat. It pulsed with dark energy. Every creature in this dungeon carries one of these. Consume it, and your body changes. Become stronger, faster, more durable. The process hurts like nothing you've ever experienced. But once it's complete, he trailed off, as movement rustled in the darkness ahead. A shadow rat emerged from between two crystal formations. Bigger than a dog, faster than a striking snake. Its eyes locked onto the three humans with predatory intelligence. Elena's hand flew to the knife at her belt. Garrett stepped forward, positioning himself between the creature and the others. Cassius did nothing. The rat lunged. Its claws raked across Cassius's forearm before he moved. A deliberate hesitation, a calculated wound. Blood splattered the crystal floor. Elena screamed something. Garrett surged forward. But Cassius was already spinning, already drawing the short blade he'd taken from a dungeon chest, already driving it through the rat's skull with the precise efficiency of someone who'd practiced this exact kill 300 times in the past 3 days. The creature collapsed. Cassius stood over it, bleeding, smiling. That was floor 1. He pulled another core from the corpse, adding it to his collection. By the time I'm done training you, that thing won't even slow you down. And the equipment we harvest. He gestured deeper into the dungeon. Common-tier gear from the first 10 floors matches standard military equipment. Rare tier from floors 11 through 25 surpasses elite night gear. Beyond that, Garrett's voice had changed. The contempt was gone, replaced by something that might have been fear or hope. Beyond that, we become unstoppable. The word hung in the air like a promise, like a threat. Elena recovered first. The Crown Dungeon Authority. If they discover, they won't. Cassius's gray eyes hardened. Not until we're ready. Not until Ashwick has an army capable of defending what's ours. Garrett said nothing. His gaze kept drifting back toward the dungeon entrance, toward the village above, toward something only he could see. Cassius let the silence stretch. Then he reached into his pack and produced a small bundle of purple glowing herbs. These grow on floor 3. Healing herbs that can cure respiratory ailments within minutes. I harvested them this morning. He held the bundle out to Garrett. For Mira, the big man's hands trembled. As he took the herbs, his jaw worked soundlessly. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely a whisper. 47. 47 people who can still work the fields. He looked up, and his eyes held something new. Desperate, dangerous belief. Tell me what you need us to do. The morning after Garrett's oath, Cassius gathered the 47 able-bodied villagers at the dungeon entrance and told them the truth. Not all of it. Not about his past life. Not about the strategic calculations running constantly behind his eyes. But enough. Floor 1 contains shadow rats and bone beetles. The rats hunt in packs of 3 to 5. They're fast, they're vicious, and their bites can cause infection if untreated. The beetles are slower, but armored. You'll need to strike their underbellies or the joints between their carapace segments. He paced before them, watching their faces cycle through fear, confusion, and desperate attention. Each of you will clear floor 1 alone. No help, no rescue. You either kill everything in your assigned section, or you retreat to the entrance and try again tomorrow. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. A woman with gray-streaked hair raised her hand like a child in a schoolroom. My lord, we're farmers. We've never, I know what you are. Cassius cut her off, not unkindly. I know what you've been, but what you've been doesn't matter anymore. Count Draven is coming. Maybe in a year, maybe in months. And when he arrives, he won't see farmers or families or people who've worked this land for generations. He'll see obstacles, resources, things to be crushed and consumed. You let that sink in. Floor 1 is your first test. Pass it, and you earn the right to become something more. Fail it, and you can return to the surface. No scam, no punishment. But understand this. Those who clear the floor will receive power beyond anything you've imagined. And those who don't, he shrugged, will watch their families burn when Draven's army arrives. Silence. Heavy, suffocating silence. Then Garrett stepped forward, hefting a salvaged pickaxe across his massive shoulders. Well, you heard the Lord. We learning to fight, or we standing here, feeling sorry for ourselves? The first week was brutal. Cassius had expected complaints. He hadn't expected the sheer volume of them, the endless chorus of pain and exhaustion and "I can't do this anymore." 3 recruits suffered injuries serious enough to sideline them. A broken arm from a bone beetle's crushing mandibles, a torn leg muscle from dodging too slowly, a concussion from slipping on the dungeon's slick stone floors. But nobody died. That surprised him. In his calculations, he'd estimated a 10% fatality rate during initial training. The dungeon, it seemed, was marginally more forgiving on its first floor than he'd anticipated. Or perhaps these farmers were more resilient than he'd given them credit for. Probably both. Garrett became the linchpin of survival. The big man couldn't be everywhere at once. But he tried. When scrawny recruits faltered against rat swarms, Garrett would appear at the edge of their assigned section, shouting instructions and tactical advice without crossing the boundary Cassius had established. When the elderly struggled with the physical demands, Garrett organized recovery rotations, rest periods where stronger farmers would share food and water and hard-won knowledge about monster patterns. "You're not supposed to help them," Cassius observed on the 4th day, watching Garrett demonstrate a shield bash technique using a wooden board and a training dummy. "I'm not crossing into their sections." Garrett's jaw was set, stubborn. "You said they clear it alone. Didn't say anything about teaching them how before they try." Cassius almost smiled. This was why he'd chosen Garrett first. The man understood something instinctively that took most military commanders years to learn. An army wasn't just a collection of soldiers. It was a family bound by shared suffering and mutual investment. Garrett was building that family whether he realized it or not. Meanwhile, Elena vanished. She'd approached Cassius on the 2nd night, her green eyes sharp with barely concealed ambition. "You need information. I can get it. You're a failed merchant's daughter from a nothing village. What possible intelligence resources do you have?" Her smile had been thin, as a blade. "I'm a literate woman who can do arithmetic and knows how to listen. Every town within 50 miles has a tavern. Every tavern has loose-lipped soldiers, bored merchants, traveling workers who see things they shouldn't. Give me a horse in 3 days." He'd given her both. She returned on the 6th day with news that turned his blood to ice. "Count Draven has begun border inspections," she reported, her face carefully neutral. "His men are cataloging resources, population counts, defensive capabilities. 3 territories east of us have already received visits." "How long?" "Months. Maybe less." Elena's fingers drummed against her thigh. "He's not just conquering, my lord. He's consuming. Every territory he absorbs makes his army stronger, his treasury deeper. By the time he reaches Ashwick, he won't see a threat worth preparing for." "Exactly." Her eyes met his. "Which gives us one advantage. He'll underestimate us until it's too late, assuming we have something worth underestimating by. Then," Cassius nodded slowly. "Months." He'd hoped for years. The timeline was compressing, squeezing his careful plans into a desperate sprint. They needed their first success. It came from the last person anyone expected. Dex was 17, rail-thin, and possessed the moral flexibility of Snake. He'd arrived in Ashwick 2 years ago, fleeing prosecution for pickpocketing in the capital, if the rumors were true. Nobody trusted him. Nobody particularly liked him. He'd volunteered for Cassius's training with a shrug and a muttered comment about nothing better to do. But on the 7th day, while stronger farmers struggled with their brute force approaches, Dex cleared floor 1 in under an hour. Cassius watched through his soul resonance, tracking the boy's movement through the dungeon's energy flows. Where others charged at Shadow Rat's head-on, Dex danced. Where others hammered uselessly at bone beetle carapaces, Dex watched, waited, and struck with surgical precision at exposed joints. Speed, cunning, the willingness to fight dirty. Bring him to the enhancement chamber, Cassius ordered. The chamber was nothing more than a carved-out alcove on floor 2, lined with luminescent moss that cast everything in sickly green light. Cassius had chosen it for privacy. But, as word spread that Dex had cleared his trial, the entire village descended into the dungeon to watch. Let them, Cassius decided. They need to see this. The monster core sat in his palm, a crystallized sphere of dark energy harvested from a floor 1 shadow, Rat Alpha, tiny by dungeon standards. But for an unenhanced human, it would feel like swallowing lightning. This will hurt, Cassius told Dex, who lay on a stone slab, try to look brave and failing. More than anything you've ever experienced. The core's energy will tear through your muscles, your bones, your organs. It will rebuild them stronger. But for approximately 4 minutes, you will know what it feels like to die. Dex swallowed hard. And after, you'll be faster than any normal human. Stronger. Your senses sharper. Cassius leaned close. You'll be the first of something new, Dex. The first of my soldiers. The boy nodded. Cassius pressed the core against his chest. Dex's scream echoed through the dungeon for 300 heartbeats. The watching farmers flinched, grabbed each other, covered their ears. Several looked ready to bolt. But nobody moved. They watched Dex thrash and howl, watched his veins bulge black beneath his skin, watched tears and blood leak from his eyes, as his body shattered and reformed around the monster's essence. Then silence. Dex lay still. For one terrible moment, everyone thought he was dead. Then he sat up, reached for the chamber's support beam to steady himself. The wood exploded into splinters beneath his grip. Dex stared at his hand, at the fragments of timber embedded in his palm that he couldn't even feel, and laughed. It was a wild sound, half sob, half triumph. It worked, someone whispered. The murmur spread like fire through dry grass. 36 recruits stepped forward before Cassius could say another word, their eyes fixed on Dex's trembling, transformed body. We want to try, Garrett announced, speaking for all of them. Tonight, 3 months in the dungeon changed everything. The farmers who had once flinched at shadows now moved through darkness like they owned it. Their bodies had hardened into weapons. Their eyes had learned to read death in the twitch of a monster's muscle. And their hands, those same hands that had once known only plows and hoes, now gripped dungeon-forged steel with killing intent. 29 of them had survived the core enhancement process. 29 ordinary men and women had swallowed agony and emerged transformed. And under Cassius's relentless command, they had pushed deeper into the primal dungeon than he'd dared to hope. Floor 12. The chamber stretched before them like the ribcage of some ancient beast, stone pillars rising into darkness that their torches couldn't pierce. The floor guardian waited at the center, a stonehide crusher, 8 feet of armored muscle with fists like boulders and a hide that had already shattered 2 swords against its surface. Formation holds, Cassius called from the rear, his gray eyes tracking every movement. Garrett, you're the anvil. Everyone else, wait for my signal. The massive farmer stepped forward without hesitation. 3 months ago, he would have questioned this order. 3 months ago, he would have called it suicide. Now he just grinned beneath his beard and planted his feet. The crusher charged. The impact should have killed him. The monster's fist connected with Garrett's raised arms with enough force to shatter castle gates, and the sound that echoed through the chamber was thunder given form. Stone cracked beneath Garrett's boots. The pillars trembled. But Garrett didn't move. Something rippled across his skin, a shimmer like heat rising from summer earth, and the force that should have pulverized his bones simply stopped. Absorbed, redirected into the ground beneath him in a web of cracks that spread like frozen lightning. Now, Cassius shouted. The team struck. As one, blades found gaps in the crusher's armor. while it reeled from the impossible resistance. Elena appeared from nowhere, one moment shadow, the next a blade across the monster's throat, her shadow step carrying her through patches of darkness faster than the eye could track. 30 seconds later, the Guardian fell. Garrett lowered his arms slowly, staring at his own hands like he'd never seen them before. What was that? Cassius was already at his side, studying him with an intensity that bordered on hunger. Earth and endurance. Your body learned to absorb impact and channel it away from your vital structures. A rare smile crossed his face. You just became unkillable, Garrett. Congratulations. The floor reward chest materialized in a shimmer of golden light. But Cassius barely glanced at it. His mind was already racing ahead, calculating how to integrate Garrett's new ability into formation tactics, how to push the team harder now that they had a true vanguard. Elena flickered into existence beside him, her auburn braid swinging with emotion. Scouts report floors 13 and 14 are clear of anything we can't handle. But 15, she hesitated. 15 has a shadow wolf pack. At least 12 of them. We'll need another month of training before we attempt it, Cassius decided. Mark the floor entrance and seal it. No one goes past 14 without my explicit, my lord. One of the farmers approached, her face pale. Has anyone seen Mira? The words hit like a physical blow. Cassius spun toward Garrett, whose expression had gone from triumphant to terrified in a heartbeat. She was supposed to stay at the surface camp. She was forbidden from entering the dungeon. But even as he said it, they all knew. Mira had never once done what she was supposed to do. They found her on floor 15. Cassius moved through the darkness alone, having ordered the others to hold position. If the Shadow Wolf pack was hunting, a large group would only provoke an attack. One person, moving quietly, might reach the girl in time, might find her body in time. He pushed that thought away and focused on his soul resonance, letting the dungeon's energy flows guide him through the labyrinthine passages. There, a faint human signature, impossibly calm for someone surrounded by predators. The chamber he emerged into stopped him cold. Mira sat against the far wall, her dirt-blonde hair matted with dried blood that didn't appear to be her own. Curled against her side, its massive head resting in her lap, was a shadow wolf. The beast was enormous, easily 5 feet at the shoulder, with fur like condensed midnight and eyes that gleamed with predatory intelligence. One of its flanks had been torn open, probably in a dominance fight with its own pack, and the wound wept sluggishly. It was dying, and Mira was feeding it strips of dried meat from her ration pack, humming softly. As she stroked its ears, the wolf's head snapped up. As Cassius entered, a growl rumbled from its throat, a sound like stones grinding together, and its lips peeled back to reveal fangs longer than his fingers. Don't. Myra's voice was quiet, but firm. He's just scared. Cassius didn't move, didn't breathe. His hand rested on his sword hilt, but he knew with absolute certainty that he couldn't draw it fast enough if the wolf decided to attack. How long have you been here? Since yesterday. She didn't look up from the wolf, her small hands continuing their gentle rhythm against its fur. He was alone. The others left him to die. I couldn't just. She trailed off, and Cassius noticed the faint glow emanating from her belt pouch. A monster core, one of the spares she must have stolen from the supply cache, was pulsing in sync with the wolf's labored breathing. Resonance. He'd read about this in the ancient texts carved into the dungeon's deepest walls. Taming bonds, formed when a monster's fading life force synchronized with a human's core energy. It was supposed to be impossible without years of training, without specialized equipment, without the pure, stubborn compassion of a 14-year-old girl who refused to let anything die alone. The wolf's growl faded. It studied Cassius with those terrible, intelligent eyes, then huffed once and lowered its head back into Myra's lap. Accepting him, Cassius crossed the chamber slowly, deliberately, until he could kneel before them both. Up close, he could see the tears tracking through the grime on Myra's face, could see the trembling in her hands as she was trying so hard to hide. You could have died, he said quietly. Mira finally met his eyes. There was no apology there, no fear. Just the fierce determination he'd seen in her father, multiplied by the reckless courage of youth. So, could everyone else? I want to fight for my home, too. The shadow wolf stirred, lifted its head, and licked Myra's hand with a tongue like rough velvet. The gesture was so unexpectedly gentle, so impossibly loyal, that something cracked in Cassius's chest. He looked at this girl and her dying wolf, and for the first time in 3 months, he didn't see a strategic asset. He saw family. The message arrived at dawn, carried by a rider wearing Count Draven's colors. Elena intercepted it before it reached Cassius's manor, her network of watchers already proving their worth. By the time the sun cleared the eastern ridge, she stood in his study with shadows under her eyes and iron in her voice. He's petitioned the crown, she said, formally declared Ashwick economically unviable. He's requesting absorption rights. Cassius read the copied document twice. The legal language was elegant, almost beautiful in its cruelty. Draven wasn't requesting permission to conquer Ashwick. He was asking the crown to gift it to him, wrapped in the pretty paper of administrative efficiency. The inspection delegation arrives in 3 days, Elena continued. 50 soldiers. Officially, they're here to assess our assets for potential integration into Draven's territory. And unofficially, they're here to remind us what real power looks like.